Although you may productively engage in the critique of feminism, let me ask you bluntly, do you think that someone should be disqualified as the leader of a vegan or animal rights organization because they're committed to feminism, because they believe in feminism? Let's just take another step and say because they're willing to make excuses for whatever is wrong within feminism as an ideology. Do we really believe that feminism has more of a negative impact on our society, or even very specifically on the sexuality of women, than Mormonism? Have you ever heard of someone going to a feminist daycare center, a feminist grade school, a feminist high school, followed by a feminist university? I hear about Mormons doing that all the time. There are Mormons, men and women, who grow up with a profoundly warped view of sexuality, gender roles, of course also politics, biology, evolution, chemistry, history, and everything else, because of the power the Mormon faith has over their lives in an organized, institutional, and very well-funded framework. Mormonism is very far from being the most influential religion in the United States of America, let alone the world. So we can ask the same question again. What is more of a problem? Feminism or the power of the Catholic Church? Feminism or Islam? And suddenly, all of these over-the-top complaints, these incisive criticisms from someone like Vegan Gains, they start to seem like a goddamn joke. All right? I myself am a critic of feminism. I myself am a critic of what I think is wrong with the whole left wing. Doesn't mean I'm conservative, doesn't mean I'm right wing, doesn't mean I even have an alternative to the left wing. But I can see and analyze and discuss what's wrong on the left. I can see and analyze and discuss what's wrong in feminism. But what's really important is to calibrate your critiques. Calibrate them. Give a sense of scale. Give a sense of magnitude. Give a sense of the seriousness of this, compared to the fact that we live in a society where there are huge, well-funded institutions that really do shape the minds and lives of young people from the cradle to the grave, like the Catholic Church, like the Mormon faith, and so on and so forth. And some of them also make excuses for and support genital mutilation, whether you're talking about male circumcision or female circumcision. Some of them make excuses for and support slavery. Like, there's no limit. So yes, there are some things wrong with feminism as an ideology. And I have personally known people where I can say their personal lives, not just their political lives, their philosophical lives, I can say their personal lives and their sex lives were screwed up by their commitment to feminism. And they later kind of grew out of it and realized, well, a lot of the stuff I read in books wasn't really true, or it was exaggerated, over the top. Yes, okay, there's a lively debate to be had about the present and future of feminism. But let's keep it in perspective. All right? There's a lot wrong with feminism, but this is just not even in the same league as the kind of problems we have to talk about in any mainstream religion, or even in mainstream political ideologies. Let's face it, in the year 2020, communism is a mainstream political ideology again. Socialism is too. So on and so forth, compared to the politics I see discussed, whatever, on CNN, on TYT, whatever fairly mainstream political discourse, okay? Now, we got problems. We got problems because Vegan Gains is an insane and uniquely poorly qualified commentator on these issues. And what can I contrast his warped version of events to? Only other sources of information that I also consider insane and unreliable. So I've got a statement here from Direct Action Everywhere. If you think I'm an uncritical supporter of Direct Action Everywhere, think again, try a Google search, look at some other videos on this YouTube channel. Direct Action Everywhere writes, we saw in your video, they're here referring to the original man who was accused, not Vegan Gains. We saw in your video that you suggested you were not actually banned from DXC. That's a crucial part of his defense, right? So we're reaching out to clear up any confusion. We realize there may have been some miscommunication between DXE's report team, DXE Toronto, and you. To be clear, your indefinite ban applies to DXE, ALC, ARC, etc. We apologize for any failure to clearly convey that. All right? So a huge part of the case Vegan Gains makes, now he presents to the public, is that there was a 7-month investigation by a third party and that this guy wasn't banned, that investigation cleared his name. And DXE is here saying, no, the exact opposite is true. No, he was banned. And no, this investigation, which they describe as being much less serious, that it wasn't this sort of quasi criminal investigation. They just said, look, one person, one mediator asked some questions and did some interviews and came to these conclusions. But no, the conclusion was that he was banned. They further comment, so I'm not reading out this statement in its entirety, no amount of flirty texts grants anyone a pass to continue escalating sexual advances after being pushed away, and previous flirtation or consensual sex is never a substitute for enthusiastic consent. So my point here is not that DXE is right and Vegan Gains is wrong. My point is not even that DXE is telling the truth, which I don't know. I have shown here on YouTube many examples of DXE lying. This comes from an anonymous DXE account, like it's allegedly just the organization speaking with its own voice, but obviously most of the time we're talking about Wayne Seong, we're talking about the leadership of DXE. I have criticized them for being lying, dishonest bad actors many times. So I can't tell you that DXE is telling the truth. I can't tell you that they're a reliable source of information. What I can tell you is that Vegan Gains is a lying, insane, unreliable, and he's a voice which is not only lacking the kind of experience, insight, and qualifications to handle this sort of thing, he's also someone who has no motivation to tell you the truth. He has no motivation to present the facts in a balanced manner. Now, likewise, one source Vegan Gains definitely did have access to was the report, or I might say the account published to the internet by the SAVE movement. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that he intentionally concealed that or misrepresented that to his audience. I personally do not find the details shocking or salacious, but they state their reasons why they have banned this man who is accused from all SAVE movement functions, and it includes that they think it was inappropriate for him to be initiating sex in meetings, organizational, political meetings. They said even if those advances were received positively, the fact that he was doing it in this context is inappropriate and is grounds for a ban. Even if they would have been received well, if they'd met in a nightclub or some other context or met in a coffee shop, like this is fundamentally inappropriate in this situation, that what he was doing sexually in a charitably provided residence where apparently 5 or more people were all kind of sleeping on the floor together. Sort of the exact sleeping arrangements, I don't know, but people were kind of camping out on a charitable basis before going to this event, that what he was doing there sexually was inappropriate, kind of full stop, period. And then there were other details where allegedly he was frustrated because this woman who did have consensual sex with him in the past, all sides agree to that. The woman also says that in the past, on this particular occasion, she did not consent to have sex with him. And he apparently loudly and angrily went into the bathroom to masturbate. And this her having to hear this masturbation was like to kind of shame or humiliate her or voice his complaint or get revenge on her. And given the description of the sleeping arrangements and the rest of the complaint, it must be that there were like 4 other witnesses to this. So I'm guessing this is like a lot of people who were awkwardly in the room like, okay, so you guys were going to have sex in front of us and we were going to pretend to be asleep, and now this guy is masturbating. Eesh. Okay? So Vegan Gains opens by arguing that it's deeply unfair to poison the well, to assassinate someone's character, to present them in an unreasonable light, and then discredit their perspective, etc., etc. But the conclusion of his own video is an attempt to seriously discredit the leadership of several vegan organizations, animal rights organizations, by pointing the finger and saying, these people believe in feminism. They're part of an ideology that makes their character questionable, that makes their word unreliable, that they're dishonest because of their commitment to this ideology. Okay? Do you think that they pray to the God of feminism 5 times a day, 3 times a day? Feminism may be an ideology you personally disagree with. You may see a lot wrong with it. Okay? All right? The level of commitment, the question of how cognitively or morally reliable you are if you're committed to feminism. To me, well, if those are your standards, then how do you regard people who are members of the Muslim faith? How do you regard people who pray multiple times a day? How do you regard people who are committed to making excuses for a deeply immoral historical figure like Muhammad the Prophet? How do you, and let's be fair and just throw in some other examples, how do you, countenance the leadership or political participation in any level of someone who's committed to the Mormon faith and makes excuses for the prophet Joseph Smith and all the terrible things he did in his life, right? If you're going to demand, Richard, or for any of you in the audience, I mean, sometimes you may feel this way, okay? Sometimes we all feel this way. I'm reading the history of the French Revolution. I'm reading about the rise of the dictatorship of Napoleon. And I say to my girlfriend all the time, the fundamental political breakthrough they made in the French Revolution was this. Hey guys, I got this great idea. Let's kill everyone who disagrees with our political party. And that became like the guiding notion in 20th century totalitarian politics, all right? Untold millions of people in communist China, in communist Russia, and so on around the world. The idea that if you disagree with the party, if you disagree with some checklist of ideological and political beliefs, your life is worthless. Your life is forfeit. How narrow are these demands, Richard? Because if you really regard these feminists in the way that you do, and again, Richard, I regard you as someone who is morally and mentally incompetent to be a leader in the vegan movement, and we all know why. It's not like anyone has even once ever written it to me, skeptically asking me to prove my case. Gee, do you really have any evidence that Richard is a bad leader for the vegan movement? Gee, I don't know. It seems like a really open question that's hard to resolve about whether or not. No, Richard, everyone has seen plenty of evidence that you have presented yourself that you are, to use your favorite terms, you are a bad actor. You are an unreliable, dishonest, lying piece of shit. You are someone who ultimately deceives yourself far more than you deceive others. You're addicted to your own notion of moral superiority, very much like a left-wing SJW stereotype. I guess you're a right-wing SJW. I don't have any better way to put it. Okay? But once you have this mentality that tore the French Revolution apart, that took all the hope and optimism of the Enlightenment and all of the hope and optimism for a meaningful form of democracy, constitutional parliamentary democracy in France, and left them only with the brutal, terrible dictatorship of Napoleon wearing a crown and fur and armor and dressing up like any other medieval monarch. Okay? This total, utter corruption of the French Revolution, right? At its core was this notion that you can kill people if they don't agree with your political ideology, right? And it wasn't just the Jacobins. The Jacobins persecuted everyone who wasn't left-wing enough, and then just a few months later, it was the Jacobins who were being persecuted for not supporting the fashion of the day ideologically. And on and on and on it went in an unbelievable succession of dominoes in Russia and China as people all around the world imitated this fundamentally ridiculous idea. And you know what the opposite idea is, Richard? The opposite idea is, hey, you know what? Feminists are people too. Feminists, they may be deeply flawed and imperfect. They may be committed to a deeply imperfect ideology. And you know what? Yeah, that ideology, it may condition them to freak out and be really judgmental when some guy gets frustrated with his girlfriend and jacks off in the bathroom. It's a weird situation, and not all of us would. You know what? Sure, there may be some human frailties involved here where they decide to ban someone for life for this activity, whereas maybe someone else, maybe someone with a different ideology would have, I don't know, a different attitude towards it. You know what? Yeah, human beings are imperfect, okay? But the opposite attitude is, hey, you know what? Feminists, they deserve a seat at this table too. Even if their perspective is a little bit warped or a little bit extreme or a little bit inconvenient for me, or if I just happen to disagree with it, Okay? They actually deserve a seat at the table, whether it's within the vegan movement or in parliament, in our democratic process. Their voice deserves to be heard. In France, back in the year 1789, hey, you know what? People who are still traditional Catholics, people who still support the monarch, people who literally believe that the monarch is in some kind of supernatural communication with God, they deserve a seat at the table too. That's the hardest fucking thing to do. The hardest thing to do is treat your enemies with decency. Is to debate with them and engage with them rationally, to include them in the decision-making process. The hardest thing for someone like Richard to do is to set aside his own bias when he's doing this so-called research that always, inevitably and inexorably, ends up just being a hatchet job against the people that he considers his political enemies. 2020, veganism is doomed.